A convergence chamber stretched impossibly wide, a vast amphitheater carved from living crystal that pulsed with light from 10,000 biosignatures. Ambassador Marcus Webb stood on a floating platform at the chamber's heart, feeling the weight of countless alien eyes studying him. The platform was small, barely 3 meters across, suspended by gravity technology that humanity still couldn't replicate. He was trapped here, held in place by forces he didn't understand, facing judgment from beings who had ruled the galaxy for millions of years. Dr. Yuki Tanaka stood to his left, her hands gripping a small data device, so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She was Earth's best xenobiologist, but all her training hadn't prepared her for this moment. To Marcus's right, Captain James Okongwo remained perfectly still in his military dress uniform, every medal earned through blood and sacrifice gleaming under the strange light. They were 3 humans, alone, facing the combined power of galactic civilization. The crowd surrounding them represented species from across known space. Beings made of energy flickered in the upper tiers. Creatures with too many limbs occupied the middle sections. Things that defied human understanding of biology filled the lower levels. All of them were here for one purpose: to watch humanity face justice. The High Arbiter materialized above the platform, a massive construct of crystalline fragments that constantly rearranged themselves into new patterns. Its species had been traveling between stars when Earth was still covered in primitive oceans. When it spoke, the words bypassed Marcus's ears entirely, peering directly in his mind through translation. Technology that felt like cold fingers touching his. Thoughts. Species designation human. You. Stand accused before thee. Galactic Council of Crimes against the Preservation Protocols. 17 violations of expansion regulations. 43 counts of unauthorized colonization. 1 count of developing prohibited warfare technologies. How does your species answer these charges? Marcus felt sweat forming on his palms. Everything humanity had worked for, everything they had built, balanced on what happened in the next few minutes. The safe answer would be to deny the charges, to ask for time to gather evidence, to negotiate for mercy. That's what every other species did when they stood in this chamber. But humanity wasn't every other species. We acknowledge the charges. High Arbiter, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the fear threatening to choke him. We do not contest the facts as presented to this council. The reaction was immediate and explosive. 10,000 species began vocalizing at once, creating a wall of sound that made the translation fields scream with feedback. Chirps, clicks, roars, and frequencies beyond human hearing merged into chaos. Marcus could see confusion rippling through the assembled observers. Species didn't confess before the tribunal. Confession meant accepting whatever punishment the council decided to impose. Behind the High Arbiter, the Tribunal Council emerged from shadowed alcoves. War Master Krell of the Vrax Dominion moved first, his 3-meter frame covered in scales that looked like black diamond. His species had conquered 400 star systems through military supremacy. When he flexed his claws, Marcus could hear the scrape of metal on metal as weapon systems. Built into his body, powered up. Next came the representative of the Luminar Collective, a swarm of thousands of small organisms that moved as a single entity, pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that hurt to look at directly. The collective had absorbed 17 species into its hive mind. It regarded individuality as a disease to be cured. The Catherine Chancellor appeared last, floating on anti-gravity platforms, its body more machine than organic tissue. Cybernetic implants glowed beneath translucent skin, processing information at speeds that would make Earth's best computers look like a Pegasus. The Kethrins had turned themselves into living weapons, sacrificing their biology for power. These were the apex predators of galactic civilization, the species that had climbed to the top and stayed there through strength. intelligence, and ruthlessness. War Master Krell leaned forward, his voice like grinding stones. Then you understand the penalty. Your expansion ends immediately. All human colonies beyond your home system will be dismantled. Your people will be returned to Earth. Your faster-than-light technology will be confiscated. Your military capacity will be reduced to levels appropriate for a single-planet species. You will remain confined to your solar system until this council determines you have achieved sufficient maturity to join galactic civilization properly. The words fell like hammer blows. Everything humanity had built in space, gone. Every colony, every station, every dream of reaching the stars, erased. Marcus felt Yuki tense beside him. Captain Okonkwo's breathing remained steady, but Marcus could see the muscle twitching in his jaw. "We understand the penalty you wish to impose, War Master," Marcus said carefully. "We reject it entirely." The silence that followed was deeper than the void between stars. Even the translation field seemed to stop working for a moment, as if the technology itself couldn't process what it had just heard. The High Arbiter's crystalline form solidified, fragments locking into a rigid configuration. "You reject the authority of the Galactic Council?" "No, High Arbiter," Marcus replied. "We reject the assumption that your penalty can be applied to humanity." Dr. Yuki Tanaka stepped forward, her fear transforming into the cold precision she used in her laboratory. She held up her data device. "The preservation protocols exist to maintain galactic stability. They prevent young species from expanding too quickly, from developing weapons that could threaten established civilizations, from interfering with primitive cultures. The regulations serve an important purpose. We understand that. Then you understand why they must be enforced against your species," the Catherine Chancellor said, its voice a synthesized monotone. "Your expansion has been aggressive. Your development of prohibited technologies is documented. Your interference with pre-contact civilizations is recorded. You are guilty of every charge presented. Enforcement of these protocols requires one fundamental assumption," Yuki continued, her voice growing stronger, "that the Council possesses accurate information about the species being regulated, that your surveillance networks have captured the full picture of who we are and what we've done." The Luminar Collective's thousands of organisms shifted into a new pattern, one that Marcus's briefing materials had identified as indicating suspicion. "We have monitored humanity for 73 standard years. Our observation networks are comprehensive. We know your population. We know your territory. We know your capabilities." Captain James Okonkwo smiled, and there was something dangerous in that expression. "You know those things about some of us, yes, but not all of us." Before anyone could respond, the chamber's holographic systems activated without external command. Images materialized in the air around the judgment platform, data streams flowing faster than the assembled observers could fully process. Star charts appeared showing human settlements and systems the Council had marked as empty. Population figures scrolled past, numbers climbing far beyond official records. When the Galactic Council made first contact with Earth 73 years ago, Marcus began. "You followed proper diplomatic protocols. You contacted our planetary government. You spoke with our elected leaders. You established treaties and agreements with the legitimate representatives of Earth's population. And your government agreed to abide by the preservation protocols," the High Arbiter stated. "The treaties were signed. The agreements were witnessed by 47 species. Earth accepted Council authority. Earth's government signed those treaties," Marcus confirmed. 8 billion humans living in the Sol system agreed to operate within the boundaries you established. They kept their word. For 73 years, Earth has followed every regulation, honored every restriction, abided by every limitation you imposed. Then what are these charges?" War Master Krell demanded, gesturing at the accusations floating in holographic text around them. The charges are accurate, Yuki said, but they don't refer to Earth. They refer to the others. New images replaced the star charts. Generation ships, massive vessels designed for journeys lasting centuries, appeared in the holographic display. Launch dates scrolled past, some showing departures from Earth that occurred more than 200 years ago, decades before the Council had even discovered humanity's existence. Before the Council found us, Yuki explained, humanity had already begun spreading to the stars. We didn't have faster-than-light travel. We built slower-than-light colony ships and sent them into deep space. Thousands of vessels carrying millions of colonists, traveling at a fraction of light speed toward distant star systems. The journeys took decades, sometimes centuries. Generations were born, lived, and died aboard those ships, never seeing their destination. The Catherine Chancellor's implants blazed with light as it processed this information. Impossible. Our survey networks would have detected such expansion. Our automated monitoring systems catalog every technological civilization in this region of space. Your systems are excellent at detecting faster-than-light signatures, Captain Okonkwo sighed. High-energy propulsion, quantum communication networks, the electromagnetic signatures of advanced industrial civilizations. But the diaspora colonies don't use any of those technologies. They communicate through quantum-entangled relay systems that your sensors read as natural cosmic background radiation. They travel on ships, moving so slowly, your automated defenses classify them as asteroids or comets. They colonize systems you've marked as uninhabitable because your biology requires conditions our people learn to live without. How many? War Master Krell's question cut through the rising noise in the chamber. His tactical mind had already begun calculating the implications. How many humans exist outside Council authority? Marcus took a deep breath. This was the moment everything changed. According to this morning's census data from the Diaspora Network, 473 billion humans across 1,900 star systems. The number hit the assembled council like a physical shockwave. 473 billion. Nearly equal to the combined population of the 50 largest council species. A civilization that had supposedly been contained for 3/4 of a century had instead become one of the most populous in known space. The chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives from 10,000 species began shouting, demanding explanations, accusing humanity of deception, calling for immediate military action. The translation fields overloaded, trying to process so many simultaneous communications, creating feedback loops of noise that made coherent thought nearly impossible. Through it all, the High Arbiter remained motionless, its crystalline form locked in a configuration that Marcus's briefing materials couldn't identify. When it finally spoke, its mental voice cut through the chaos like a blade through flesh. You deceived this council. We answered every question truthfully, Marcus replied. When you asked about Earth's population, we told you. When you asked about Earth's territory, we showed you. When you asked if Earth would abide by the preservation protocols, we agreed. At no point did any human representative lie to the Galactic Council. Omission is deception, the Luminar Collective hissed, its organisms creating patterns of anger. Omission is diplomacy, Yuki countered. The Council never asked if other human populations existed beyond Earth. You made contact with one planetary government and assumed it represented all of humanity. That assumption was yours, not ours. Then this Council will extend its jurisdiction to include these diaspora colonies, the Catherine Chancellor declared. We will bring them into compliance with preservation protocols through whatever means necessary. Captain Okonkwo's smile faded, replaced by an expression of grim seriousness. You're welcome to try, Chancellor. But before you commit your forces, you should understand what you'd be fighting. These aren't humans who grew up on a comfortable planet with a breathable atmosphere and abundant resources. The diaspora colonies are peopled by humans born in the void, raised in generation ships, trained from childhood to survive in conditions that would kill most galactic citizens within hours. They've had 200 years to perfect the art of living in places nobody else wants. And they've had 73 years since you made contact with Earth to prepare for the day you discovered them. Marcus raised his hand, and new data began flowing through the chamber systems. Trade agreements, cultural exchange proposals, technology sharing frameworks. A path forward that didn't require conflict. "We didn't come here to defy the Council," Marcus said. "We came to negotiate. Earth and the registered Sol System colonies will continue honoring the preservation protocols we agreed to. But the diaspora worlds deserve representation in galactic affairs. They've built a civilization through centuries of hardship and sacrifice. They want to join the galactic community, not stand against it. And if we refuse?" The High Arbiter asked. "Then you'll have nearly 500 billion humans operating outside Council jurisdiction, expanding according to their own priorities, forming their own alliances, developing their own technologies, all beyond your influence or control," Yuki said. "Or you can bring them into the system, give them representation, establish proper diplomatic relations, benefit from everything they've learned about surviving in impossible environments." The Tribunal Council exchanged glances, communicating through channels humans couldn't access. War Master Krell's claws retracted slightly. The Luminar Collective's pattern shifted from anger to calculation. The Kethrin Chancellor's implants dimmed as it ran probability scenarios. "Population numbers are irrelevant if those populations lack military capacity," the Collective finally said. "Quantity does not determine victory." Captain Okonkwo nodded slowly. "You're absolutely right. Which is why the information I'm about to share will concern you far more than our population figures ever could." The lights in the convergence chamber brightened to full intensity as Captain James Okonkwo prepared to explain what humanity had learned about warfare during 2 centuries of complete isolation in the dark between stars. The Council's most powerful warriors were about to discover they had been preparing to fight the wrong kind of enemy. The convergence chamber's atmosphere grew heavy with anticipation. Captain James Okonkwo stood at the edge of the judgment platform, his hands clasped behind his back, looking more like a teacher preparing to give a lecture than a military officer facing the greatest warriors in galactic history. War Master Krell leaned forward in his observation throne, battle armor humming with barely contained power. The Vraks had built their empire on military conquest, and Krell had personally commanded the fleets that brought 400 systems to heel. He knew warfare in all its forms, or so he believed. "Before we discuss human military capabilities," James began, "I need to explain something about the diaspora colonies. The Council sees them as an extension of Earth, primitive offshoots that escaped into space before proper civilization could take root. That perspective is fundamentally wrong. Holographic displays activated around the platform, showing images of generation ships moving through the void. Unlike the sleek vessels of Council species, these ships looked like floating cities, massive and ungainly, built for endurance rather than speed. The first generation ships left Earth 197 years ago," James continued. "They carried approximately 50,000 colonists each. The journey to their target systems would take between 80 and 150 years at sublight speeds. Nobody who boarded those ships expected to see the destination. They were sacrificing their lives so their children's children might walk on new worlds. The Kethrin Chancellor's cybernetic implants pulsed with rapid calculations. Inefficient. Why not wait for faster-than-light technology to develop? Because waiting meant accepting limits, Yuki Tanaka interjected, pulling up historical records. Earth was becoming crowded. Resources were growing scarce. Climate change threatened coastal populations. Political tensions were rising. The generation ships represented hope, a way forward when staying put seemed impossible. So we built the ships and sent them out, knowing most would probably fail, but hoping some would succeed. And they did fail, the Luminar Collective observed, its organisms shifting into patterns of smug satisfaction. Our records show that 73% of slower-than-light colony attempts by emerging species end in total mission failure. Equipment breaks down. Social structures collapse. Colonists die before reaching their destinations. You're correct, James acknowledged. Of the 4,200 generation ships that left Earth, approximately 3,100 reached their target systems. The rest were lost to equipment failure, navigation errors, radiation exposure, disease, and 100 other causes. Over 6 million humans died in transit. War Master Krell made a dismissive gesture. Then your diaspora is built on failure. Weak foundations produce weak civilizations. You misunderstand what failure teaches, James said quietly. The ships that survived weren't the ones with the best technology or the most resources. They were the ones with the most adaptable crews. The ones who learned to fix critical systems with improvised parts. The ones who developed new social structures when old ones broke down. The ones who turned catastrophe into innovation. Every diaspora colony exists because their ancestors learned to survive when survival should have been impossible. New images appeared, showing colony worlds that looked nothing like Earth. Planets with thin atmospheres where humans lived in sealed biodomes. Worlds orbiting dim red stars where crops grew under artificial sunlight. Asteroid settlements where entire populations had never experienced natural gravity. Moon colonies built inside ice caverns. Stations constructed around brown dwarfs in systems so dark that council surveys had marked them as uninhabited. The diaspora didn't colonize garden worlds, Yuki explained. Those systems were too obvious, too likely to be discovered. Instead, they went to places the council considered worthless. They learned to extract water from comets. They grew food in underground caverns using fusion-powered grow lights. They built their habitats to survive impacts from asteroid strikes, solar flares, and the vacuum of space itself. Because in deep space, your habitat is your only protection. If it fails, you die. The Kethrin Chancellor leaned forward, interest replacing dismissal. This explains their survival, but not their military capacity. Defensive engineering does not translate to offensive capability. James smiled that dangerous smile again. That's where you're wrong, Chancellor. The diaspora didn't develop military technology for conquest. They developed it for something much more fundamental: protection of critical infrastructure in hostile environments. The holographic displays shifted, showing what looked like simple mining equipment. Laser drills for cutting through asteroid rock. Explosive charges for breaking up comet ice. Railgun systems for launching raw materials between orbital facilities. Mass drivers for adjusting asteroid trajectories. When you live in space, everything you build serves multiple purposes, James explained. A laser drill powerful enough to cut through solid rock can also cut through starship hulls. Explosive charges designed to fragment comets can fragment invasion forces. Railguns for moving cargo can launch kinetic projectiles at relativistic speeds. Mass drivers for mining operations can redirect asteroids onto collision courses with enemy positions. War Master Krell's expression shifted from dismissal to focused attention. You weaponized your survival equipment. We recognize that survival equipment and weapons are fundamentally the same thing, James corrected. The Council builds dedicated military vessels, specialized weapons platforms, fleets designed specifically for warfare. The diaspora builds every habitat every station, every ship to be self-sufficient and defensible. Because when you're living in systems the Council considers uninhabitable, you can't call for reinforcements. You either defend yourself or you die. The Luminar Collective's bioluminescent patterns flickered with what might have been concern. Quantity of improvised weapons does not overcome quality of purpose-built military technology. True, James agreed. But you're still thinking about warfare the way the Council fights it. Fleet battles, orbital bombardment, planetary invasion. The diaspora doesn't fight that way because they can't afford to. Every ship, every weapon, every resource is too precious to waste on direct confrontation. Marcus Webb stepped forward, taking over the presentation. War Master Krell, how long would it take your fleet to sterilize Earth? Krell's claws flexed thoughtfully. 4.3 minutes from standard orbital bombardment position. Less if we deployed planet-killer weapons. And how would Earth defend itself? Planetary shields, orbital defense platforms, fighter squadrons. Standard defensive configuration for a developed world. Krell paused. But such defenses would delay destruction, not prevent it. Given sufficient firepower, any planet can be destroyed. Exactly, Marcus said. Planets are vulnerable. They're fixed positions that can't maneuver, can't hide, can't escape. That's why the diaspora doesn't put all their resources on planets. They spread out. Hundreds of small habitats instead of a few large cities. Thousands of hidden stations instead of obvious orbital facilities. Populations distributed across entire star systems instead of concentrated on single worlds. The holographic display changed again, showing a star system that looked empty at first glance. Then markers began appearing. Small habitats hidden in asteroid fields. Stations built inside hollowed-out moons. Populations living in rotating habitats at Lagrange points. Mining operations on thousands of different asteroids. The system wasn't empty at all. It was packed with human infrastructure, just spread so thin that casual observation would miss most of it. This is the Kepler 442 system, Yuki said. Official Council surveys marked it as uninhabited. In reality, it houses 400 million humans across 6,000 separate facilities. If you wanted to destroy the human presence in this system, you'd need to find and eliminate 6,000 individual targets, most of which look like natural asteroids or comets until you examine them closely. And while you're searching for targets, James added, those facilities are launching countermeasures. Remember those mining railguns? Each habitat has several, usually disguised as cargo transport systems. They can launch iron slugs at significant fractions of light speed. The slugs are cheap, unguided, and don't show up well on most targeting sensors because they're just chunks of metal. But when a 50-kilogram iron slug hits your warship at 0.2 light speed, the impact releases energy equivalent to a tactical nuclear weapon. War Master Krell was no longer dismissive. His tactical mind was processing the implications. Distributed infrastructure, improvised weapons platforms, kinetic bombardment using industrial equipment. This is guerrilla warfare on a stellar scale. It's survival warfare, James corrected. The diaspora never planned to fight the Council in direct confrontation. They planned to make any attempt to conquer them so costly, so time-consuming, so frustrating that you'd eventually decide it wasn't worth the effort. The Catherine Chancellor's implants blazed with light as it ran combat simulations. Our analysis suggests such tactics would indeed prove costly. But cost is relative. Given sufficient motivation, the Council could devote the resources necessary to eliminate these colonies. You could, Marcus agreed, but consider what that would require. The diaspora occupies 1,900 star systems. Even assuming you could clear one system per day, which is optimistic given the need to hunt down thousands of hidden facilities in each system, Complete elimination would take over 5 years of sustained military operations, during which time the diaspora would be building more facilities and new systems, developing new defensive technologies, and making your task progressively harder. And while you're dedicating military resources to hunting humans in empty star systems, Yuki added, what happens to your existing commitments? The Council maintains order across 6 million inhabited worlds. How many of those worlds might see your distraction as opportunity? How many rival species might use your resource commitment against humans to advance their own positions? The silence in the convergence chamber had changed quality. It was no longer the silence of shock, but the silence of serious consideration. The assembled observers were beginning to understand that humanity hadn't come to the Council to beg for mercy. They'd come to negotiate from a position that, while not strong, was at least defensible. The High Arbiter's crystalline form shifted through several configurations before settling on one that Marcus's briefing materials identified as indicating deep contemplation. You paint a picture of protracted conflict, neither side capable of decisive victory. A war of attrition that benefits nobody. Exactly, Marcus said, which is why we're proposing an alternative. Bring the diaspora into the Council framework. Give them representation. Establish formal diplomatic relations. In exchange, they'll agree to operate within modified preservation protocols that account for their unique circumstances. Modified protocols? The Luminar Collective's patterns flickered with suspicion. You ask for special treatment? We ask for fair treatment, Yuki countered. The preservation protocols were designed for species that expand using faster-than-light travel, settling garden worlds similar to their home planets, building centralized civilizations that can be easily monitored and regulated. The diaspora doesn't fit that pattern. Their expansion is slower, but more distributed. Their settlements are in systems you don't want. Their technology base is improvised rather than standardized. The existing protocols don't map well to their reality. War Master Krell stood, his massive frame dominating the tribunal platform. And if we reject this proposal, if we decide the threat of distributed human colonies is too dangerous to tolerate, James met the War Master's gaze without flinching. Then you'll fight a war unlike any in Council history. Not against armies or fleets, but against populations that have survived 2 centuries in environments that would kill your soldiers in hours. Against infrastructure so distributed that destroying it would be like trying to empty an ocean 1 cup at a time. Against people who learned from childhood that the void of space is less dangerous than surrender. You would sacrifice billions of your own people? The collective seemed genuinely confused by the concept. The diaspora has already sacrificed millions, Marcus said quietly. Every person who died on those generation ships. Every colonist who suffocated when a habitat seal failed. Every child who grew up never seeing natural sunlight because their parents chose freedom over comfort. Those sacrifices built a civilization that values independence above everything else. They won't surrender it easily. The High Arbiter raised multiple appendages, calling for silence as murmuring spread through the assembled observers. This council will adjourn for deliberation. The tribunal will consider humanity's proposal and render judgment. In the interim, Captain Okonkwo, you will provide detailed technical specifications of diaspora defensive capabilities to our military analysis division. With respect, High Arbiter, I will not, James replied calmly. Providing complete technical specifications would eliminate the defensive uncertainty that makes confrontation inadvisable. I will provide sufficient information to demonstrate credibility, but not enough to enable easy countermeasures. Krell's claws extended, then retracted. The War Master was beginning to understand how humans negotiated. You maintain leverage even while seeking agreement. We seek partnership, not subjugation, Marcus corrected. Partners maintain reasonable operational security. That's not hostility. It's prudence. The High Arbiter's form collapsed into its most compact configuration, a sign of decision made. The tribunal will reconvene in 6 standard hours. Until then, the human delegation will remain in the convergence chamber. You will not be restrained, but you will not be permitted to leave. Is this acceptable? Acceptable, Marcus agreed. As the tribunal council withdrew to their deliberation chambers, and the majority of observers dispersed, the 3 humans found themselves alone on the judgment platform, suspended in the vast empty space of the chamber. That went better than I expected, Yuki whispered. We've presented our position, Marcus replied quietly. Now comes the hard part. They're going to test our claims. And when they do, they're going to discover that everything we've told them is true. The question is whether that makes them more or less willing to negotiate. James gazed up at the artificial stars dotting the chamber's ceiling. War Master Krell is already running scenarios. I could see it in his eyes. He's realized that fighting the diaspora would be like fighting the void itself. You can't intimidate empty space. You can't negotiate with vacuum. And you can't conquer people who've already accepted that death is preferable to surrender. Do you think they'll agree to our terms? Yuki asked. Marcus considered the question carefully. I think they'll agree to something. Whether it's what we want depends on what happens in the next 6 hours. And what happens after they verify our claims. The 3 humans settled in to wait, knowing that somewhere in the vast bureaucracy of the Galactic Council, analysts were already working to confirm or disprove every claim humanity had made. The truth would either save them or condemn them. Either way, the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. 4 hours into the deliberation period, the convergence chamber remained mostly empty except for the 3 humans on the judgment platform. Marcus Webb had taken to pacing the small space, 3 steps in one direction, 3 steps back, the repetitive movement helping him think. Yuki Tanaka sat cross-legged, her data tablet balanced on her knees, reviewing contingency plans for every possible outcome. Captain James Okonkwo stood motionless, hands behind his back, staring at nothing in particular while his mind ran through tactical scenarios. The chamber's translation. Fields crackled to life without warning. Captain Okonkwo, a moment of your time. James turned to find War Master Krell standing at the edge of the platform. The Vrax had approached silently, which should have been impossible for a being wearing full battle armor. The fact that he'd managed it was a demonstration of skill, a reminder that he hadn't become War Master through politics alone. War Master, James acknowledged with a slight nod. I thought the tribunal was in deliberation. The tribunal deliberates, Krell confirmed. I prefer to gather information directly. He gestured with one clawed hand, and the gravity field surrounding the platform shifted, creating a small private space separated from the others by a subtle distortion in the air. Walk with me, human. I have questions. James glanced at Marcus, who nodded permission. The captain stepped toward Krell, and together they moved to the far edge of the platform. You fought in the Mars Colonies conflict, Krell said. It wasn't a question. I commanded the 3rd Expeditionary Force during the final phase, James confirmed. I reviewed the tactical reports. 14 separate colonial enclaves spread across Valles Marineris, all claiming independence from Earth authority. They had defensive positions in terrain that favored guerrilla warfare. They had popular support among the civilian population. Standard military doctrine would suggest a protracted conflict lasting years. It lasted 8 months, James said, because you didn't fight a standard campaign. Krell's eyes narrowed. You cut life support to non-compliant habitats. You poisoned water recycling systems. You introduced targeted bioweapons into sealed environments. You treated the conflict not as a war between armies, but as an extermination of infrastructure. James's expression remained neutral. The Mars situation required resolution. Prolonged conflict would have resulted in more casualties on both sides. I used the tools available to achieve strategic objectives with minimal loss of life. Minimal loss of combatant life, Krell corrected. Civilian casualties exceeded military deaths by a factor of 7. In a habitat-based conflict, there's no meaningful distinction between civilian and military infrastructure, James replied calmly. Every habitat engineer who maintains life support is a strategic asset. Every agricultural technician who manages food production is part of the supply chain. Every civilian who supports the resistance contributes to its continuation. The Mars colonies learned that lesson. So did I. Krell was silent for a long moment, studying the human with unreadable eyes. You understand why I ask these questions. You want to know if the diaspora colonies will fight the way I fought on Mars, James said. You want to know if they'll employ total warfare tactics if the Council attempts to bring them into compliance by force. Will they? James turned to face the War Master directly. Mars was a situation where Earth had overwhelming force but difficult terrain. We could afford to use brutal tactics because we knew we would eventually win. The diaspora colonies face the opposite situation. The Council has overwhelming force, and the diaspora has impossible terrain. If they fight, they'll use tactics that make Mars look gentle by comparison. Explain. On Mars, I could target specific habitats because there were only 14 major enclaves and a few hundred minor settlements. The diaspora has 6,000 facilities in some systems. You can't target them all simultaneously. So they'll use that distributed nature as a weapon. Every facility you destroy becomes a lesson for the others. Every new tactic you employ gets analyzed, countered, and distributed through the quantum relay network. Every resource you commit to the conflict is a resource they've forced you to waste. Krell's claws flexed. You describe a war of attrition. I describe the only kind of war the diaspora can fight, James corrected. They can't match Council military power. They can't defend their facilities against determined attack. So they won't try. Instead, they'll make you work for every single victory. They'll make you spend months hunting down facilities that house a few thousand people each. They'll make you commit warships and soldiers to systems that have no strategic value except that humans live there. They'll make you choose over and over again whether the next facility is worth the time and resources to destroy. And when we make that choice, when we decide the cost is acceptable, James met the War Master's gaze steadily. Then you'll discover what humans do when they have nothing left to lose. The diaspora colonies exist because their ancestors were willing to die in the void for a chance at freedom. That willingness doesn't fade with time. It strengthens. Every generation born in those habitats grows up knowing their existence depends on self-reliance and determination. They won't fight to win, War Master. They'll fight to make you wish you'd never started. Krell was quiet for a long time, processing this information. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost some of its hard edge. I commanded the conquest of the Talvex systems. 4 inhabited worlds, 3 major moons, extensive orbital infrastructure. The Talvex had strong defensive positions and good tactical leadership. The campaign took 2 years and cost me 30% of my fleet. But we won because eventually the Talvex leadership recognized they couldn't prevail. They negotiated surrender to preserve what remained of their civilization. The diaspora doesn't have centralized leadership to negotiate surrender, James pointed out. Each system operates independently. Each colony makes its own decisions. Even if one system chose to surrender, the others would continue fighting. You wouldn't be conquering a civilization, War Master. You'd be conquering 6,000 separate communities, each one willing to die rather than submit. "This is why you came to the council," Krell said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Not because you fear defeat, but because you fear the cost of victory for both sides." "Humanity doesn't want war with the council," James confirmed. "Earth has lived under preservation protocols for 73 years and prospered. We've learned from galactic civilization. We've benefited from trade, cultural exchange, and technological cooperation. But the diaspora colonies spent 2 centuries developing independently. They won't give up that independence easily. Bringing them into the council framework peacefully benefits everyone. Forcing them into compliance benefits no one." Krell turned to look out over the empty convergence chamber. "The tribunal will propose restrictions. Monitoring stations in diaspora systems. Limitations on military-capable infrastructure. Inspections to ensure compliance with weapons prohibitions. The diaspora will reject surveillance infrastructure," James said flatly. "Privacy is fundamental to their culture. They've spent 200 years avoiding detection. They won't surrender that capability." "Then what will they accept?" "Representation without surveillance," James replied. "Give them seats on the council. Let them participate in galactic governance. Establish trade agreements and cultural exchange programs. In return, they'll agree to limitations on expansion rate, restrictions on certain weapons technologies, and participation in conflict resolution frameworks. But those agreements have to be voluntary, negotiated between equals, not imposed by force. The tribunal may not accept voluntary compliance," Krell warned. "The council maintains order through enforcement. Then the tribunal needs to understand that enforcement works only when the cost of compliance is less than the cost of resistance," James said. "For the diaspora, the cost of resistance is acceptable. They've already paid it. The cost of forced compliance is surrender of everything they've built. That cost is not acceptable." Krell nodded slowly. "I will relay this perspective to the tribunal. I make no promises regarding their response." "I expect nothing more," James said. The War Master started to leave, then paused. "Captain Okonkwo, answer one more question. If the council rejects your proposal and initiates military action against the diaspora, will Earth intervene?" It was the critical question, the one that could transform a difficult conflict into an impossible one. James considered his answer carefully. "Earth is bound by treaty to honor the preservation protocols," he said. "We won't violate those agreements. But Earth will not assist the Council in military operations against the diaspora. We'll maintain neutrality. And neutrality means no Council military vessels will be permitted to use Earth's orbital facilities for refueling or repairs. No Council forces will be granted passage through the Sol system. No Earth-based corporations will provide supplies or logistical support to Council military operations. Strategic neutrality that favors the diaspora," Krell observed. "Practical neutrality that recognizes political reality," James corrected. "Earth's population knows the diaspora colonies exist. We've known for decades. Public opinion strongly supports peaceful integration, not military subjugation. If the Council attacks the diaspora, Earth's government will face tremendous domestic pressure to support our cousins. Maintaining official neutrality will be difficult enough. Active cooperation with Council military operations would be politically impossible." Krell's expression suggested he'd expected this answer. "Then Earth's neutrality is itself a strategic factor." "Every choice creates strategic effects," James agreed. "The Council's choice to seek peaceful integration creates opportunities for cooperation. The choice to pursue military solutions creates complications. We're trying to help the Council choose wisely." "Your species plays dangerous games, Captain." "We play the only game we can," James replied. "Survival." The War Master departed without further comment, leaving James alone in the small private space created by the gravity field. After a moment, the field collapsed and he rejoined Marcus and Yuki on the main platform. "Well?" Marcus asked quietly. "Krell understands the tactical situation," James reported. "Whether he can convince the rest of the tribunal remains to be seen. But he's asking the right questions." "Which are?" Yuki pressed. "Whether winning a war is worth the cost of fighting it," James said. "And whether there are better alternatives to warfare." Marcus checked his chronometer. 2 hours until the tribunal reconvenes. If they verified our claims about diaspora population and distribution, they'll know we weren't exaggerating. The question is whether confirmation makes them more willing to negotiate or more determined to act. "We've done everything we can," Yuki said. "Now we wait for their decision." But waiting was perhaps the hardest part. The 3 humans had come to the convergence chamber with a plan, executed it successfully, and now sat powerless while the Galactic Council decided the fate of billions. All they could do was trust that logic would prevail over fear, that negotiation would triumph over force, that the Council would recognize the difference between conquest and cooperation, somewhere in the vast bureaucracy of the galactic government. Analysts were studying human dispersal patterns. Military theorists were running combat simulations, and diplomats were drafting frameworks for possible agreements. The next 2 hours would determine whether humanity joined the galactic community as partners or remained forever outside it as potential threats. Convergence Chamber's artificial stars continued, their slow rotation overhead, marking time with indifferent precision. The 3 humans waited in silence, preparing themselves for whatever judgment was coming. The galaxy held its breath, and humanity's future hung in the balance. The convergence chamber began filling 90 minutes before the scheduled reconvening. Representatives from thousands of species took their positions in the tiered seating, creating a gradually building susurrus of multilingual conversation that the translation fields struggled to process. Marcus noticed the composition of the audience had changed. Where before the observers had been primarily low-level diplomatic staff and curious bureaucrats, now the chamber hosted senior representatives, military advisors, and species leaders with actual decision-making authority. Word had spread. The galaxy was paying attention. YUKI nudged Marcus's arm, pointing to a section of the upper tiers where a cluster of reptilian beings had gathered. Those are Salkan Trade Federation representatives. Their economy depends on controlling shipping routes through the outer reaches. If the diaspora has been operating in those regions undetected for decades, it undermines their entire commercial intelligence network. "Good," Marcus murmured. "The more species that realize they've been operating with incomplete information, the more pressure the Council faces to establish formal relations rather than attempt suppression." Captain Okonjo was watching a different section of the chamber, where heavily armored warriors from a dozen different species had congregated. Military observers he recognized, officers sent by their governments to assess the implications of distributed human infrastructure. He could see them studying the holographic displays that still floated around the judgment platform, analyzing the star charts showing human settlement patterns, running calculations about response times and resource requirements for potential military operations. Let them calculate, James thought. The more they studied the problem, the more they'd realize it had no easy solution. The High Arbiter materialized exactly on schedule, its crystalline form more solid and defined than before. The Tribunal Council emerged from their deliberation chamber in formal procession. War Master Krell, his battle armor polished to mirror brightness. The Luminar Collective, its thousands of organisms moving in perfect synchronization. The Kethrin Chancellor, cybernetic implants glowing with controlled power dot behind them, came representatives James hadn't seen before. A massive aquatic being floating in a sphere of liquid, covered in bioluminescent patterns. A cloud of nanomachines that coalesced into a vaguely humanoid shape. A crystalline intelligence that looked like living diamond. The extended tribunal, he realized. The council had brought in additional authority for this decision. The gravity field around the judgment platform intensified, holding the three humans motionless as the High Arbiter's voice resonated through the chamber. The tribunal has completed its deliberation. We have analyzed the evidence presented. We have verified the claims made regarding human population distribution. We have consulted with military, scientific, and diplomatic specialists across 47 member species. We are prepared to render judgment. Marcus felt his heart hammering, but kept his expression neutral. This was it. Everything they'd worked for came down to the next few minutes. The human claims regarding diaspora colony population and distribution are verified as accurate. The High Arbiter continued. Our survey networks confirm the existence of extensive human infrastructure in systems previously marked as uninhabited. The population estimate of 473 billion appears conservative rather than inflated. We acknowledge that a significant human civilization has developed outside council awareness and jurisdiction. A ripple of reaction moved through the assembled observers. Having suspicions confirmed by official tribunal statement made the situation undeniably real. The question before this council is one of jurisdiction and enforcement, the Arbiter said. Can the preservation protocols be enforced against a population that never agreed to them? Should they be? And what are the practical implications of attempting such enforcement? The aquatic being in the liquid sphere pulsed with light, and its translated voice boomed through the chamber. I am Counselor Thex of the Deepwater Alliance. My species achieved stellar civilization 8 million years ago. We have seen countless young species emerge, expand, and either integrate into galactic civilization or isolate themselves from it. The humans present an unusual case. They are simultaneously integrated and isolated. Earth participates in council frameworks, while the diaspora operates independently. This duality creates unique challenges. The Catherine Chancellor's synthetic voice cut through the murmur that followed. Our analysis indicates that military suppression of diaspora colonies would require resource commitment exceeding the benefits of bringing them into compliance. The distributed nature of their infrastructure, combined with defensive capabilities inherent in their survival equipment, makes conventional conquest impractical. We could destroy them, but only through sustained effort over multiple years at significant cost. Krell the Unbroken stood, his massive frame commanding immediate attention. The Vrax Dominion has fought and won 400 conquest campaigns. We understand warfare in all its forms. The tactical assessment is clear. Fighting the diaspora would be possible but expensive. More importantly, it would establish a dangerous precedent. If the Council resorts to military solutions against populations that merely seek independence, we invite resistance from other species who might prefer autonomy to integration. The crystalline intelligence spoke next, its voice like chimes in a windstorm. From a legal perspective, the situation is complex. The preservation protocols were established through consent of member species. Earth consented, but the diaspora existed before first contact and never participated in the consent process. Forcing compliance retroactively sets problematic legal precedent. If we claim jurisdiction over populations based solely on species identification rather than voluntary participation, we transform the Council from a cooperative framework into an imperial authority. The Luminar Collective's bioluminescent patterns flickered with agitation. Yet allowing human expansion to continue unchecked invites chaos. If other species learn that sufficient dispersal exempts them from Council authority, the entire regulatory framework collapses. Which is why we must distinguish between exemption and accommodation. The nanomachine cloud said, its form shifting as it spoke. The diaspora is not exempt from regulation. But regulation must be negotiated rather than imposed. We propose a framework that acknowledges their unique circumstances while bringing them into the council system. The High Arbiter gestured, and new holographic displays materialized throughout the chamber. The tribunal proposes the following framework for diaspora integration. First, formal recognition of diaspora colonies as autonomous political entities with representation rights in council proceedings. Each major diaspora concentration, defined as systems hosting more than 1 billion humans, receives one council seat. Based on current population distribution, this grants the diaspora 73 seats. Marcus felt a surge of hope, but kept his expression controlled. 73 seats was more than they dared ask for. Second, the Arbiter continued, voluntary compliance with modified preservation protocols. The diaspora agrees to limitations on expansion rate, defined as no more than 5% annual growth in settled systems. They agreed to restrictions on development of weapons capable of stellar-scale destruction. They agreed to non-interference with pre-contact civilizations. In exchange, they maintain sovereignty over internal governance and freedom from surveillance infrastructure in their systems. Third, economic integration. Diaspora systems gain access to council trade networks, technology sharing programs, and cultural exchange initiatives. They contribute to council operations through taxation based on economic productivity rather than population count, acknowledging their lower per capita resource availability. Fourth, security cooperation. Diaspora colonies participate in collective defense agreements but maintain autonomy over internal security matters. They provide intelligence regarding deep space phenomena and stellar cartography gathered through their extensive exploration programs. The High Arbiter paused, allowing the terms to sink in. These terms are presented as a framework for negotiation, not as a final decree. The tribunal recognizes that successful integration requires mutual agreement rather than imposed conditions. Ambassador Webb, does this framework provide acceptable basis for negotiation? Marcus took a careful breath before responding. The framework addresses our primary concerns: representation, sovereignty, and voluntary rather than imposed compliance align with diaspora values. I cannot speak for all diaspora colonies, as they maintain independent governance, but I believe this framework provides a foundation we can work with. War Master Krell, does this framework satisfy council security requirements? The Arbiter asked. Krell's claws drummed against his armor thoughtfully. The framework transforms a potential security threat into a managed relationship. By bringing the diaspora into the council system, we gain intelligence about their capabilities and activities while avoiding costly conflict. The expansion limitations prevent uncontrolled growth. The weapons restrictions address proliferation concerns. From a military perspective, negotiated integration is preferable to forced compliance. Counselor Thex, from a historical perspective, is this framework viable? The aquatic being's bioluminescence pulsed in complex patterns. We have attempted both forced integration and voluntary partnership with emerging species over our long history. Voluntary partnerships prove more stable and mutually beneficial. The diaspora's existing civilization demonstrates resilience and adaptability. These are valuable traits. Better to welcome such qualities than attempt to suppress them. The High Arbiter's form stabilized into its most solid configuration. Then the tribunal proposes that the Galactic Council adopt this framework as the basis for formal negotiations with diaspora representatives. Ambassador Webb, Captain Okonkwo, Dr. Tanaka, you will serve as initial contact points for establishing communication with diaspora leadership. A formal negotiating conference will be convened within 60 standard days. Do you accept this charge? We accept, Marcus said, speaking for all three of them. Then this matter is temporarily resolved, pending formal negotiations, the Arbiter declared. The charges against humanity are suspended. The human delegation is free to depart the convergence chamber and begin outreach to diaspora colonies. This tribunal stands adjourned. The gravity field around the judgment platform released. For the first time in nearly 12 hours, the three humans could move freely. Marcus's legs nearly buckled from the sudden change, but he forced himself to remain standing. The chamber erupted in noise as thousands of species began discussing the tribunal's decision. Some voices expressed approval, others concern, still others outright opposition. But the decision had been made. Humanity had come seeking recognition and achieved it. As the crowd began dispersing, War Master Krell approached the platform. Captain Okonkwo, a word. James stepped forward to meet the Vrax warrior. War Master, you fought well today, Krell said. Not with weapons, but with words and strategy. The Vrax respect such combat. Thank you, War Master. Your understanding of the tactical situation was crucial to this outcome. Krell's expression became serious. Do not mistake pragmatism for friendship, human. The council agreed to negotiate because the alternatives were worse. But trust must be earned. If the diaspora violates the terms being negotiated, the response will be swift and absolute. Understood, James replied. But I think you'll find that humans honor agreements we participate in creating. The problem was never our willingness to cooperate. It was being asked to accept terms we had no voice in establishing. Then let us hope your diaspora cousins share your perspective, Krell said. Because the galaxy is watching now. Your species has the opportunity to prove it can be a responsible member of galactic civilization. Do not waste it. The War Master departed, leaving the three humans alone on the platform. Around them, the convergence chamber slowly emptied as representatives returned to their own territories to report on what they'd witnessed. YUK. I let out a long breath. We did it. We actually did it. We started the process, Marcus corrected. Now comes the hard part. We have 60 days to contact diaspora colonies scattered across 1900 systems, explain what happened here, and convince them to participate in formal negotiations with the Council. Some of them will refuse, James predicted. The colonies in the Deep Black, the ones that have been isolated for over a century, won't trust any central authority. We'll need to respect their choice to remain independent. Can we afford to have diaspora colonies refusing to participate? Yuki asked. Won't that undermine the entire agreement? The framework allows for it, Marcus pointed out. Voluntary compliance means some might choose not to comply. As long as the majority participate, the system works. And frankly, colonies that want to remain completely isolated aren't the ones we needed to worry about anyway. The dangerous scenario was forcing colonies that wanted autonomy to submit to authority. By making participation voluntary, we've eliminated that conflict. We should start with the inner diaspora colonies, James suggested. The systems within 20 light years of Earth. They've maintained the closest contact with home. They'll be most receptive to Council integration. Once we have their agreement, we can use them as examples for the more distant colonies. Marcus nodded. Agreed. Yuki, start drafting communication protocols. We need messages that explain what happened without triggering suspicion that this is some kind of trap. James, work with your military contacts. Some D. Diaspora colonies will want security guarantees before they'll even consider talking to us. See what assurances we can provide. What will you do? Yuki asked. Marcus gazed out at the now empty convergence chamber. I'm going to start planning the negotiating conference. 60 days to organize a gathering where representatives from hundreds of independent colonies negotiate with the largest governmental body in the galaxy. This will be delicate. That's an understatement, James muttered. Despite the challenges ahead, Marcus felt cautiously optimistic. They'd achieved what they came for. Recognition for the diaspora and a framework for peaceful integration. Everything else was just details. Difficult, complicated, potentially civilization-altering details. But still just details. The three humans left the convergence chamber together, stepping through the gravity gates that would return them to Earth. Behind them, the vast crystal amphitheater fell silent. But the implications of what had transpired would echo through the galaxy for generations. Humanity had announced its presence. Now they had to prove they deserved a place among the stars. The quantum relay network hummed with unprecedented traffic. Messages flashed across 1900 star systems at faster-than-light speeds, carrying news of the convergence chamber negotiations to diaspora colonies that had operated independently for decades or even centuries. Some received the information with cautious optimism, others with outright suspicion, a few with hostility. Marcus Webb sat in a secure communication facility on the Earth orbital station, watching response data flow across multiple screens. After 3 weeks of intensive outreach, patterns were emerging. The colonies fell into 3 broad categories. Though the divisions weren't absolute, the inner diaspora, colonies within 50 light years of Earth that had maintained regular contact with humanity's homeworld, showed strong support for Council integration. These systems had always viewed themselves as extensions of Earth's civilization rather than truly independent entities. Formal recognition by the galactic government validated their existence and offered opportunities for trade and cultural exchange they'd craved for decades. The middle diaspora, colonies between 50 and 200 light years out, displayed mixed reactions. These communities had developed distinct cultural identities while maintaining awareness of Earth's activities. Some saw Council integration as a path to greater resources and protection. Others worried about losing the independence their ancestors had fought so hard to establish. The deep black colonies, settlements beyond 200 light years in systems, so isolated that round-trip communication with Earth took years even at FTL speeds, largely rejected the entire concept. These were the most independent-minded diaspora populations, communities that had survived generations without any external contact. They wanted nothing to do with the Council, Earth, or any authority beyond their own local governance. How many confirmed acceptances? Yuki Tanaka asked, entering the communication center with a data tablet clutched to her chest. 412 colonies representing approximately 290 billion people, Marcus replied. That's about 61% of the total diaspora population. Enough to make the framework viable? Barely. The Council wanted participation from at least 50% of diaspora systems. We're at 43% by system count, but the participating systems represent the majority of the population. The holdouts are mostly small, isolated colonies. Captain James Okonkwo appeared on the main view screen, transmitting from the Military Coordination Center 3 decks below. We have a problem. The Kepler 442 system just declared they're refusing all Council contact and will treat any inspection vessels as hostile. Marcus swore under his breath. Kepler 442 was one of the largest diaspora concentrations, home to over 400 million people across 6,000 separate facilities. If they refused to participate, it would significantly undermine the framework. What's their objection? Marcus asked. They're concerned about the monitoring provisions in the draft agreement, James explained. Even though we negotiated freedom from surveillance infrastructure, the agreement includes provisions for Council inspection teams to verify compliance with weapons restrictions. Kepler 442's leadership considers any inspection regime an unacceptable violation of sovereignty. Can we negotiate modified terms for specific systems? Yuki suggested. That sets a dangerous precedent, Marcus countered. If we allow custom agreements for every colony, the framework becomes meaningless. We need general principles that apply across the board. Then we need to convince Kepler 442 that the inspection provisions are reasonable, James said. I'll take a ship out there personally. Meet with their leadership face to face. Sometimes personal diplomacy works better than remote communication. That's a 4-week journey each way, Marcus pointed out. The negotiating conference starts in 5 weeks. Then I'd better leave today, James replied. Yuki, you'll have to represent military concerns at the conference. Marcus, keep working the other colonies. We need as many participants as possible before formal negotiations begin. Within 6 hours, Captain Okonkwo departed Earth aboard a fast courier ship. Heading into the deep black, where Kepler 442 waited with weapons armed and suspicions high. Marcus watched the ship's FTL signature disappear from tracking screens and hoped James's personal touch would succeed where remote diplomacy had failed. The weeks that followed blurred into a continuous cycle of communication, negotiation, and crisis management. Colonies changed their positions daily as leadership factions debated the merits of council integration. Some systems that had initially refused participation reconsidered after neighboring colonies committed. Others that had tentatively agreed withdrew after incidents with council survey teams triggered old fears about external authority. The most difficult negotiations involved weapons restrictions. The diaspora colonies argued that their survival equipment, while potentially usable as weapons, was essential for life in hostile environments. Restricting laser drills, explosive charges, and kinetic launch systems would cripple their ability to mine asteroids, process resources, and maintain infrastructure. The Council countered that unlimited access to such equipment made verification of weapons limitations impossible. Marcus found himself mediating between positions that seemed incompatible. The Council demanded assurances against proliferation of dangerous weapons. The diaspora demanded freedom to maintain the tools they needed for survival. Both sides had legitimate concerns. Neither would accept solutions that compromised their core interests. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The Talvex Commonwealth, one of the species War Master Krell had conquered decades earlier, proposed a solution based on their own integration into the Council framework. Instead of prohibiting dual-use equipment, they suggested establishing technical specifications that allowed survival. Equipment while preventing weaponization beyond defensive needs. Laser drills could be built to specifications that allowed asteroid mining but limited effective range against starship hulls. Explosive charges could be formulated for maximum efficiency in fragmenting ice and rock while being less effective against military targets. Kinetic launch systems could be designed with safety governors that prevented acceleration beyond industrial requirements. The proposal wasn't perfect. Determined engineers could bypass specifications with modifications, but it provided a framework for distinguishing between legitimate industrial equipment and dedicated weapon systems. More importantly, it demonstrated good faith by acknowledging that diaspora colonies needed industrial equipment to survive. Marcus presented the Talvex proposal to diaspora leadership across multiple systems. Response was cautiously positive. The restrictions would require equipment modifications, which meant costs, but they didn't eliminate essential capabilities. After 3 days of intensive consultation, 483 colonies representing 312 billion people agreed to accept the modified framework. The Council formally announced the Diaspora Integration Conference would convene in the Convergence Chamber in 1 week. Representatives from participating colonies began arriving at the Council's capital station, traveling in ships that ranged from sophisticated FTL vessels to converted cargo haulers that had been retrofitted with jump drives. The diversity of the diaspora fleet was itself a statement. These were people who made do with what they had, who built their civilization from salvage and determination. Captain Okonkwo returned from Kepler 442. 2 days before the conference, his ship showing damage from what he described as a misunderstanding with automated defense systems. But he brought good news. Kepler 442 would participate in the conference and accept the modified framework, provided they received explicit guarantees that Council inspection teams would coordinate with local authorities and respect operational security concerns. How did you convince them? Marcus asked as they reviewed final conference preparations. James smiled. I showed them the alternative. Walked them through war game scenarios of what happens if the Council decides the diaspora is too dangerous to tolerate. Showed them casualties, resource losses, habitat destruction. Made it very clear that pride is worthless if your children are dying in vacuum because your life support got destroyed. Harsh approach. Effective approach, James corrected. The Kepler 442 leadership needed to understand that sovereignty doesn't mean immunity. You can have independence or you can have isolation, but you can't have both. They chose independence with participation over isolation with vulnerability. The conference began with ceremony that would have been impressive even if the stakes hadn't been so high. The convergence chamber filled with representatives from 5,000 species, the largest gathering in Council history. The diaspora delegation alone numbered over 700 representatives, each one authorized to speak for their home system. The High Arbiter opened proceedings with a statement that acknowledged the unprecedented nature of the situation. Never before had the Council negotiated integration with a civilization that had developed outside its awareness. The framework being discussed would establish precedent for how the Council dealt with hidden or isolated populations across the galaxy. The negotiations lasted 3 weeks. Every provision was debated, refined, and debated again. Diaspora representatives brought practical concerns about implementation. Council members raised questions about enforcement and verification. Slowly, painfully, through countless hours of discussion, a comprehensive agreement took shape. The final document included representation, rights for diaspora colonies based on population thresholds. It established voluntary compliance frameworks that required participation but respected local autonomy. It created economic integration mechanisms that allowed diaspora systems to access Council markets while maintaining independence in internal economic policy. It established security cooperation agreements that contributed diaspora resources to collective defense while preserving local control over internal security. Most importantly, it created legal precedent for how the Council would engage with populations that existed outside its traditional frameworks. The agreement acknowledged that galactic civilization was larger and more diverse than the Council's regulatory structures had assumed. It made room for difference while maintaining order. When the High Arbiter called for final ratification, Marcus felt his heart pounding. Everything came down to this vote. If the agreement failed, humanity would be right back where they started, facing possible conflict with the most powerful governmental body in the galaxy. The Tribunal Council voted first. War Master Krell's vote came as affirmation, as did the votes from the other military representatives. They understood that negotiated integration was preferable to warfare. The Economic Councils voted affirmation, recognizing the trade opportunities diaspora integration represented. The Scientific Councils voted affirmation, eager to learn what the diaspora had discovered during 2 centuries of deep space exploration. The vote passed the Tribunal Council unanimously. The diaspora delegation voted next. Each representative stood and declared their position individually, allowing their voice to be heard across the galaxy. Some votes came with reservations, others with enthusiastic support, but in the end, 683 of the 700 representatives voted to ratify the agreement. 17 abstained. No one voted against. The High Arbiter's crystalline form blazed with light. By the authority vested in this council, by the consent of its member species, I declare the Diaspora Integration Framework ratified and binding. Humanity is welcomed as a full participant in galactic civilization. The Convergence Chamber erupted in celebration. Representatives from thousands of species stood and vocalized approval in their native languages, creating a symphony of sound that the translation fields didn't even try to process. It was pure emotion, joy and relief and hope that conflict had been avoided and partnership achieved. Marcus found himself surrounded by diaspora representatives, all of them wanting to shake his hand, thank him for his work, express their cautious optimism about the future. Yuki was crying openly, overcome by the magnitude of what they'd accomplished. Even Captain Okonkwo allowed himself a genuine smile. They had done it. Against overwhelming odds, facing the most powerful organization in the galaxy. 3 humans had negotiated recognition for a civilization the Council hadn't even known existed. They'd transformed a potential security crisis into an opportunity for cooperation. They'd proven that humanity, for all its faults and divisions, could unite when necessary to achieve the impossible. As the celebrations continued, Marcus slipped away to a quiet observation deck overlooking the Council capital station. Through the viewport, he could see ships from 1,000 different species, evidence of a galactic civilization so vast and ancient it made humanity look insignificant by comparison. But humanity wasn't insignificant anymore. The diaspora had proven that through determination, ingenuity, and willingness to sacrifice, humans could survive anywhere, build anything, achieve the impossible. And now, after 2 centuries of isolation in the deep black, they were finally coming home to a galaxy that recognized their right to exist. The aliens had brought their strongest warriors to the Convergence Chamber, expecting to intimidate a young species into submission. None of them had been ready for humanity's first move, not defiance or surrender, but negotiation from a position of prepared strength. Marcus smiled and returned to the celebration. There would be challenges ahead, implementation difficulties, disputes over interpretation, the inevitable friction of integrating vastly different cultures. But those were problems for tomorrow. Today, humanity had won its place among the stars. And that was worth celebrating. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.